Get ready for an absolutely brutal king hunt. But would Alireza be able to finish off this game, or would he stumble at the finishing line? He's struggled a bit in this tournament so far, hasn't yet won a game. So let's see what happened here. He kicked off with pawn e4 against Rapport, and here Rapport went pawn e5. And Alireza said this surprised him because Rapport normally plays the Sicilian, of course, so not his usual repertoire. Now knight f3 from Alireza, we had knight c6 here, and he said that maybe Rapport was expecting an Italian, so he went for a Roy Lopez here, and now we had knight f6, the so-called Berlin defence, a reputation for being quite solid, and the main move here is castles. Then we go into the Berlin endgame with takes on e4 with the knights, the queens come off, all that kind of stuff. Hikaru loves to play this online, for example. But here Alireza goes pawn to d3. He solidifies that e4 pawn, doesn't allow the endgame, keeps more pieces on the board. So now we had the bishop coming out to c5, castles from Alireza. And one thing to note here, c3 is actually a more common move. Now Alireza goes castles, perfectly respectable, but it does allow this knight d4 jump, the pawn's not yet on c3, and this is supposed to give black a pretty decent game already. So what's Alireza got in mind? Well, we'll see. This is subtle stuff, and when you're not quite used to this opening, you can easily misstep. Now you can't take this pawn on e5 here, just to quickly mention, then you lose your bishop on b5 of course. So Alireza captured here, the bishop recaptured, now he went pawn c3, it dropped back, and now the knight wants to land on c4, but if you come to d2 here, you block in your bishop, so it comes to a3 instead. Now we had pawn c6, the bishop dropped back, pawn d6 bolsters the centre, and now the bishop nudged all the way back to b3, looks down at the black king, and here again Richie just missteps, not the most accurate move. Now he should really just castle his king here, or maybe go pawn a5, that seems to be a decent move, so that now if you go knight c4, you can actually drop this bishop back. But we didn't have any of these moves. Instead we had queen e7, kind of a strange looking move, supports e5, maybe supports d5 later on, but Richie's still not castling the king, and he never actually castles. He said in an interview the other day actually he doesn't like castling, I mean kind of jokingly, but he is very aggressive with how he actually plays. So after queen to e7, we had knight to c4, hitting that bishop. Now you might think to nudge it back to c7, you can do that, but here Rapport is very nervous to leave this diagonal. He's really worried about this f4 break. I mean, you can already see all of the attacking plans for white here. So instead of doing anything with that dark squared bishop, we actually had bishop to g4, but this isn't a good move because it actually just improves Alireza's queen. It nudges across to e1, and once you get f4 in, well then this queen can come out on these dark squares of course, plus this bishop can be chased. Say pawn h3, g4 at the right moment, you know, that bishop doesn't sit well on g4 basically. So bishop c5 was now played, it saves the bishop, prepares b5, a5 expansion, king h1 from Alireza, his plan's very obvious, pawn to a5, and you can start with pawn a4 here as white, but Alireza just goes for it straight away, pawn f4, very direct. Now a4 was played, bishop c2, pawn b5, and once again Alireza plays in one of the most direct manners here, so you can go knight to e3 with a good game, but he instead takes on e5, no time to capture the knight yet, or we take here with a good game. So we had recaptures with the pawn, and now again you can go knight e3, but Alireza just slams down this knight takes on e5, lets the queen capture, because then he's pushing d4 here. Now you have to capture that one with the bishop. If the queen goes away somewhere, wherever, then we take the bishop. Much better game for white. So we had captures here, pawn recaptures, queen takes, and now Alireza just gets this massive attack. Bishop d2 was actually the most accurate move here, but he goes bishop to e3, still a good move, and again, black kind of has to start gobbling these pawns. There was some talk in the studio, Yasser Sir, when I was watching on the St. Louis stream actually, and he was saying, if I'm going to die, then I want to die with a full tummy. Someone else was saying, if I'm going to die and I fall off a cliff, then I want to take as many of my enemies with me as I can. The point being, if you're getting hunted, then try and at least pick up some material before you die your death, basically. So we had picks up on b2. Now this queen came to f2, protects this bishop here, and also forms this battery on the dark squares. Now we had bishop e6 from Rapport. Good move. It comes back to the defensive position, also prepares knight g4. Bishop d4 was played, and now queen b4. And this is one of the subtle differences between the bishop coming to e3 and not d2 earlier, is the queen can kind of hang around the position here on the queen side, then it transfers to e5. In the bishop d2 lines, it kind of gets kicked back to e7, it's a bit more passive. So after queen to b4, bishop c5 from Alireza, the queen goes away. And now look at this bishop, by the way. This king is not getting castled anytime soon, but Alireza has to keep up the initiative, because if black goes queenside at any point, let's not forget they're 2 pawns ahead, so could be winning the game if you're not careful. So the rook came to the c file from Alireza, sets up some discoveries, and now here there are different moves for black. I quite like knight to g4 here, forces queen g1, and then queen e5 could be played, and it's not so easy for white to actually come crashing through here. You know, your queen is a bit more passive now, and if you push h3, well, h5 can always be considered, or you can even drop back, and now you're looking at knight h5, knight g3 plans. You know, this is very much a double-edged game, but we didn't have knight to g4. Instead, rook d8 was played, hits that open file. Now Alireza could take on a4, I should briefly mention, win a pawn, but it's not what he's looking to do. Instead, he nudges back, opens up the discovery, the queen goes away because he wants to keep this one as an attacking piece looking in this direction. So queen h4 from Alireza, he comes onto those dark squares, looking around the king, protecting this pawn, and now here actually Rapport blunders. He's in time trouble here already, he's been uncomfortable all game, and he plays this bishop c4 move, once again using the same bishop to improve an enemy piece. That's twice he's done that in this game, because now he kicks the rook into f5. You know, the bishop just left that square, but actually this is just helping Alireza attack, because now the queen has to go away, it comes to b2, hits this rook. Now Alireza considered rook e1, it's the most accurate move, but he went rook g1 instead. He said he thought this was just more comfortable, tuck it away. He was in a bit of time trouble too. And now bishop e6, Rapport comes back, acknowledges it wasn't the best move to leave that square, but does Alireza move the rook? Well, no. At this stage, the writing is on the wall, so he goes queen to g3, eyeing this pawn which just can't be defended in any sensible way. I mean, say you try pawn g6, well, you can actually just drop this rook back, hit the queen here. Now the queen's actually overloaded, protecting the knight. It can come to a1 and there's a whole long line, but basically these rooks are just too much. They overload the queen, it has to move away, and then you pick up this knight, or you have all sorts of mating threats, because the queen's also looking at b8 here. So if this rook ever leaves the back rank, then you've got all sorts of mating motifs using this bishop. So that's why we didn't have g6, and equally if you take that rook here, well, this is just suicidal. Opening that e-file, you're not long for this world. So instead of those, we had knight d7, best move. The queen now actually protects this g7 pawn, plus the knight hits the bishop, so it dropped into d6 here. I mean, what a thorn in the side of black. Queen d4 now played, centralizing, and Alireza was already trying to make e5 work here, but he couldn't quite make it work as well tactically as he wanted to. It's still okay, but instead he retreated this rook first, so it's not going to be taken by the bishop anymore, prepares pawn e5, and there's very little moves now for black. So h5 was played, trying to liberate the rook. Alireza goes e5 here, and he's now blocked the queen from the defense of this pawn, so it comes across to g4. Is Alireza trading queens? Well, of course not. Here he wants to attack. He nudges back across. Now we had pawn h4, trying to continue the attack. Pawn h3 kicks the queen. It came back to h5 here, and now bishop e4, very simple stuff. How do you actually protect this pawn? And already the computer just wants to sack a piece here, take on e5. By the way, this doesn't work tactically if you think you can win a pawn, because then you've got this simple tactic at the end, picking up the queen due to the check. But we didn't have takes on e5. Queen h6 was played instead. Again, looking to exchange queens. Again, Alireza ducks it. Now, queen a7 was a very strong move, but queen f3 also very good. Hits this pawn, more than adequate. Pawn f6 now played. I mean, you can't defend this pawn. And this move is just designed to give the king a space here. But bishop takes on c6 now played. The king came to f7. The bishop munched on b5. Queen h5, again trying to trade them off. You guessed it, Alireza's having none of it. Queen e4, and now one last desperado from Rapport. He's right at time control. He takes on e5 here, and what he's got planned is that if the bishop recaptures, then he goes rook d5, hits both of these pieces, tries to make it a bit complicated. Actually, white's still got a decent game with bishop takes on f6, as I've highlighted there, but there's no need to even go in for any of this, because before recapturing the knight, you can chuck in this Zug, hit the queen here with the bishop, and that queen's overloaded. It has to come to g5 to actually hold the knight here. If it comes to g6, for example, thinking, okay, if you take my queen, I'll recapture with the knight. Well, this just fails to queen takes on e5. Again, the pawn is pinned. Game is gone. So queen g5 was played, holding the knight, but now the bishop takes on e5. Here, Rapport resigned. So he really should have castled that king, and I'm so pleased for Alireza to finally get a victory on the board. He's played e4 the last 2 days, had a great game against Rajabov, squeezing him, almost turned it into a win. Now he does get the win today, and e4 is really his bread and butter. You know, he never looked quite there when he played d4 against Fabi, so really pleased for him. Great to see him get a victory. Let's see what he can do second half of the tournament now. Thanks very much for watching. If you want to see another epic game between these two players, then click here. See you soon.